Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 7th episode of A Week Ahead, starring me, Liam, and my friend Tommy.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. Episode 7. Episode 7. Thank you again for listening.
Little over a month so far. It is April 21st. Hope everyone had a good Easter and 420, however you celebrate. We got Earth Day coming up. Another good holiday. For weather for today, we could see below right now it's currently 67, getting a little bit hot in Ohio. Switching them heaters to cool, to put them AC on. Tuesday it's looking pretty clear. Today we had some rain. Tomorrow will be 62, high, low of 43. Wednesday will be a high of 74, low of 48. Thursday will be 78, low of 59. Friday will be raining. Tuesday through Thursday will be sunny, light clouds. Friday, high of 73, so getting hotter, which will be nice, but kind of like Thursday, but rainy, so probably going to get some humid, low of 52. Saturday, raining again, high of 60, low of 42. Sunday, high of 60, low of 43. No freezing temperatures this week, so we are good on that. Pretty much in the spring, getting to the summertime. Looking like we're getting 31% humidity. That was yesterday, though. It's probably a little bit higher now. Looking below. You also could see the live stocks for today, but Tommy will be going over that now as well.
Yeah, so the stocks, so just a quick recap from last week. The Dow was down 0.89%. NASDAQ was down 0.44%. S&P was up 0.52%. Today, the major indexes are down about 2%-ish due to Trump threatening to fire the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. So we see sort of the chaos of the Trump administration continuing to affect the markets, whether it be through the threatening of the firing of Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, or the tariffs. Just right now, the markets are really, really, really unstable.
And before we go into our first topic here, and we are seeing that with the Trump administration, some of that will be our topics as well. Make sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're liking the content. You could turn on notifications so you get notified before the show starts, about 30 minutes before. And then as the show goes live, you get a notification on your phone. Make sure to turn that on. Share us on any social media you have, or share to your friends as well. We're all local from the Youngstown area, Trumbull County area, Warren area, so it's nice that we got some younger people doing this, and that me and Tommy decided to do this. It's nice we're 7 weeks in, almost 2 months in. When we get to our 9th week, I guess we'll be over 2 months, especially because this week of April, we got 5 weeks. But Tommy will be going into our first national news topic of the night, which will be how Trump's fighting with higher ed.
Yeah, so it seems like the last week of news coverage has just been kind of focused on Trump sort of fighting the major colleges and universities around the country, specifically Harvard. He's been targeting other universities as well, but Harvard seems to be taking sort of the limelight here. So the government sent a demand letter to Harvard trying to coerce them into enacting sweeping changes to combat so-called anti-Semitism or lose funding. They wanted, reforms to, protest policies, curriculum, that type of stuff. It's being reported by the New York Times that the demand letter was sent in error, but that's kind of a moot point because the Trump administration stated it stands by the letter. Harvard refused, which was good on them, and the government froze funding to a lot of their programs and research, etc. And they began exploring other options to revoke their tax status, limit their ability to enroll international students, and accused Harvard of improperly taking foreign money, a claim that Harvard denies and asserts that it has followed all applicable law when it comes to disclosure of such funds. What's good to see is, Harvard taking this stand is other universities have backed them up, sort of tried to defend them, released public statements. The chairs of the presidents of the different universities have been very supportive. Even Columbia University which initially sort of acquiesced to these demands of the Trump administration. Um, Even though they did that, they did come to Harvard's defense. So then some breaking news today, um, which I have not had the time to read. I just saw it, my breaking news notification on my phone. Today, Harvard filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration over over the freezing of funds. So this is still very much an ongoing story, but it sort of shows, how the Trump administration, the Trump regime, if you will, is trying to, limit what can be taught and what can be said in universities, which is, very disturbing as it comes to, free speech grounds or academic freedom grounds. And it's, really, really good on Harvard, for fighting back against this sort of authoritarian tendencies of the Trump administration, and also good on these other universities for sort of rallying around Harvard in their effort to protect their institutional independence, their right to have academic freedom, and the right to give their students an inclusive education.
Yeah, agreed. And kind of like what we talked about last week and a couple of weeks ago, we don't really want to put asterisks on any type of degree, even high school degrees or college degrees, especially for what you're paying for in a college degrees in certain fields and college degrees, what you're going for. It is nice to see, like you're saying, Princeton and Columbia back them up.
Yeah, and locally, not terribly locally, but in Ohio, some of the Big Ten schools, Ohio, Michigan, etc., they're trying to get together right now and form like a compact where they will defend each other when they inevitably be targeted by the Trump administration. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how that plays out, and if that actually is enacted and signed off on by all the Big Ten schools. And it's also going to be kind of interesting, to see Ohio State and Michigan, kind of working together on this. But good for them. Good for them. I think all these universities, whether it be Harvard, the other, sort of elite Ivy League schools, or the Big Ten schools like Ohio State, Michigan, they all need to come together and support their right to academic freedom. And I think overall, this is, of course, very, very bad what the Trump administration's doing. But I am happy to see, at the very least, that the universities are sticking together for now.
Agreed, and it's such a bad look for history and everything as a whole. These universities are probably saying to themselves, this is only going to be 4 years of Trump anyway, so even if he's going to play this game of tax issues, they're probably figuring out, how much private money we need to get in to get those 4 years okay, you know what I mean, and we'll have to cut some programs. If Trump really wants to play that, but that's all for the history books, showing how anti-education Trump is, especially in a time where head of a Department of Education doesn't even know the difference between AI. She called it A1. So
like the steak sauce.
Yeah.
Like the steak sauce.
Yeah. And it's just it serves the intelligence that he put, some of the people he put in place, especially we kind of knew it was happening from about 2025, especially when he put in 2025 people. But it just sucks that he's being so, like you said, our government's being so authoritarian when it comes to education. Because kind of like we know, even when the left was implementing policies or trying to have colleges help out on just learning about EQ and DEI and stuff as a whole, helping out with stuff like affirmative action. It wasn't stuff that was heavily implemented like this, where we were oh, we'll get rid of your money. A lot of these schools, they implemented DEI and stuff like emotional intelligence, high EQ, on their own, because that's kind of their job. Colleges, unlike probably how some high schools are, you're not putting your football guy as your principal or the head does everything. In a college, you're letting the engineering guys, I knew when I went to school at University of Akron, they did a lot of stuff different on campus. They had the civil engineering school work on that. It saves them money. So Akron, you said, it has a good law program because of Goodyear. I bet if Akron school, they probably tie a lot of their, even their law workers with their school as well to help out with that. So you pick for programs to do the best. You're not going to have your civil engineers running your psych, your psych area, your I don't know what you would call it, but I know you can go to counseling in college for free. Like, you're not gonna step in and it's gonna be like a civil engineer student talking to you. It's gonna be a psychologist
Right.
student, or a psychologist
Yeah.
themselves, or a counselor or whatever. It's not like, so you always, colleges always pick the best people to do these things. But when you have an authoritarian government that thinks they know everything, they're gonna put their hands in places that it shouldn't go in, and then mess up stuff like this, which is kind of a stain on our history. And I really hope Trump, and it's kind of hard because the first Trump administration, he kind of learned from, in that, like, there were a lot of people from the admin state, or people that were in politics for years, from the Obama administration, from the Bush administration, that were like, Trump, we're not going to do this, like, you can't do this, or they just weren't going to listen to him. Like with a story with him and saying that we should increase our nuclear power by 10% of the nuclear arsenal, and they just ignored him. And he never realized it because he doesn't write stuff down and he'll forget. But like, now he puts in people that are so like yes men for him, that they will just do whatever he says.
Yeah, he's doing sort of the classic authoritarian move, where he's putting people in power not based on, their abilities to perform a certain job well. Instead, he's putting people in power because they are directly loyal to him. That's sort of classic authoritarianism. And just one more thing I wanted to say on this, I kind of wanted to circle back, to why they're doing this. They're doing this mainly for two reasons. A, to combat DEI programs. And as I said earlier, the other reason why they're doing this is they want to combat so-called anti-Semitism. I say so-called anti-Semitism, because, well, first let me say that I am, of course, against anti-Semitism, but being pro-Palestinian, being against the genocide that is being perpetrated by the state of Israel against the Palestinian people, that is by no means anti-Semitism. Israel is a nation state, and you can criticize that nation state without disliking the Jewish people. And the right seems to be conflating these two things, conflating the disagreement about the genocide and anti-Semitism. Those are not the same thing. They're not the same thing at all. You can be not anti-Semitic, but still criticize the genocide that's being perpetrated by the state of Israel towards the Palestinian people. So that's the first thing I wanted to say about this. Why one of the first premises of why they're doing this is just totally ridiculous. The second premise is sort of this anti-DEI sort of crusade that the Trump administration and the right is currently engaging in.
Mm-hmm.
Having went to law school and reading all of the famous sort of civil rights cases, the old ones, the new ones, learning about affirmative action. The courts, they use this term. It's called the badges and incidents of slavery. And we see that these sorts of historical ramifications of the past, threaten and hurt minority communities today. So programs like affirmative action and DEI, they seek to help remedy that by bringing all people into the fold, making sure that they can achieve a higher education, have a good paying job. And it's just so disturbing to me that some people on the right, just seem to ignore the sort of historical tragedies that have happened, and just seem to stick their head in the sand about how, these things, still are affecting people today. So not only do I think like what Trump is doing against Harvard and other higher education institutions is bad, I also think their premise for doing this, the whole reason why they're doing this, is just short-sighted, wrong, and just completely deplorable.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I'll kind of like go off both of your points. Your first point, I agree too. Like, anti-Semitism is bad, but standing for one country, like we're saying in Palestine and everything going on with a genocide there, it doesn't make you anti-Semitic. What I find interesting is maybe it's because it's the same people that in the early 2000s said every Muslim was an extremist because of Muslim extremists. And we didn't say, hey, you guys are all, anti-Muslim as a whole, even though they were going after Muslim people as a whole and not just the extremists, not being fair. Because like we talk about a lot, if we're being fair, there's American and our religious extremism with Christianity and shooting up schools, or crazy white people shooting up Dollar Generals because of racism, shooting up shopping malls in Buffalo. Dollar General was in Florida. So like we talk about, like it does matter to know the past, and it kind of does play into this number two as well with DEI. And I always tell people, it's interesting because I've been around a lot of diversity ever since like high school. I did robotics, college I did canoe, but like in high school doing robotics, we had a lot of different people, different colors, Muslims, black, white, brown, just all different color people. And there was never issues with that. Like I liked learning from everyone. And as you go on to college, especially in a degree like civil engineering, it is heavily skewed. Like it's not like, obviously like there's still like, I believe my final class I always say was probably like 60% white people. But in a place like Youngstown, international students come in, but we still have a lot of Muslim, a lot of Indian people that aren't Muslim or are. There's a lot of people from the Middle East, a lot of people from Asia. Some of that reason is because we do have to realize that, one, the Muslims did create math, so they are going to have some people that are very good at math and want to come to America to get better education. And then two, as well, like, oh man, I kind of forget what I may have been going with the second part. For a good part about it too is that you learn like from different experiences from different people. Like everyone has their own experience, but like if you have like we always say with DEI, if you have a room full of white people, you're gonna have all white experiences or all white experiences with all white answers. And like saying it in that way is weird, but we have to think about it that like our experiences a lot of the times create our answers. So like as an engineer, my experience creates my solutions. But someone who's from India, Palestine, Pakistan, all these different places, even Jerusalem, like I have coworkers that are Muslim and they have family in Jerusalem, but they're from Palestine. So it's crazy how sometimes this is, but like we got to realize it helps us. You know what I mean? Like we need to have these people with different experiences and different solutions matter. We have a lot of good innovators in American history, but like Steve Jobs always talks about creativity and like how that creates better solutions. And another answer for that like is diversity. When you have diversity, you have more creative solutions. You're not just having the same solutions as anyone else. So I feel like that's something that's very important as well.
No, I completely agree. And I grew up and graduated from high school in the townships here in Trumbull County. There was one African American that graduated with me. And, then I went off to college at Youngstown State University and ultimately Akron Law School. And, during that time, I got to meet a bunch of different people from a bunch of different backgrounds, and I was able to talk to them, learn about their lived experience, and that sort of like set me off on like a path of, trying to learn about how different problems affect different communities. And just talking to these people, learning about their lived experience, I strongly believe made me a more well-rounded person that is, more empathetic, that is, better able to understand how something that looks okay to me can actually be very negative for people in another group. So I completely agree with you that sort of the sort of diversity, I think it makes us all stronger. It makes us all more well-rounded people. And it's just a shame that efforts to facilitate that are being criticized as woke.
Yeah.
I don't even know what woke means.
Yeah.
I have a JD. I don't know what woke means even. Okay.
Maybe talk about it's for new PC. Like it's what I feel like, and I'll debate anyone with this, is that a lot of people have this issue in life that if any time there's an imbalance, they feel like just making it perfectly balanced is just the answer and that's it. So a lot of people are for right. They don't want to learn DEI. They don't feel like they need to because everything's equal now. Well, everything's equal now in law. In paper, everything's equal, even though it might not be everything's equal on paper. But we don't talk about that. But in their heads, everything's equal. But that's not how things
Right.
work in life. A great example. If I were to dig a big ass hole in my front yard, got an excavator and what's called cut in engineering, and cut out like 30 cubic yards of soil out of my front yard, and I said, all right, now that's what's equal. Because I took that away, that's equal to me. It's not, though. Like, there's still some missing. Anytime that you have, like, hundreds of years, 150 years of slavery, and then another 100 years of Jim Crow and segregation, redlining, a lot of stuff we put on black people, that they couldn't get houses in certain areas, and that was okay. They couldn't just get loans for houses. It was just harder for them to make money and be equal Americans. It's going to take years of the opposite balance, helping them more than we help out anyone else because of that. And like we have to understand that. But a lot of people don't want to understand that. And like what I'm saying, why I'll debate people with it is they just want an easy answer that it's all equal now. We don't have to do anything. I don't care. And it's like, if being honest, and we're gonna have a big talk, if we're not gonna pay reparations, we at least have to do something. Because like these,
Exactly.
one, they deserved reparations back in the day when they were released, and that's not what happened. So if we can't give them reparations, we have to give them other civil services, might be a better word, that will help them out in life. And that's okay. Like we always talk about, and what's interesting about history is when crack hit the black community, what did America do? And when opioids and meth hit the white community, what did America do? And like see those reactions, and you see how America is. And like you have to learn from that, and we have to be better than that, but we really aren't trying to be.
You you're mentioning how the right views everything as sort of perfectly balanced and equal. The problem with that is I'll kind of talk about this one case that I learned in law school. It's this case out of the city of East Cleveland, and it's a case about zoning, but there's many different other cases that sort of demonstrate that a seemingly race neutral law can actually discriminate based on race. So in this East Cleveland case, the city of East Cleveland passed an ordinance saying that no more than 3 family members can live in the same house, and like, okay, that's by its plain text, that's race neutral, but the problem is due to systematic inequality that was facing and still faces African Americans in East Cleveland around the world. A lot of African American families, they lived with more than 3 relatives in their house. They had extended family living in their house. So this sort of race neutral ordinance actually had a disparate impact on African American communities. So it's just, I think that just sort of illustrates how you often have to think deeper about things than just simply, the plain text or the plain action taken. You have to look also how it can affect different people in other ways.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And like, what's interesting is too, it shows the disconnect sometimes, because we have this everywhere, between our constituents and like the actual people that the constituents voted to represent them. Now this could be city council who's passing zoning ordinances, but let's say you're in East Cleveland, right? And you have a mostly white zoning council that they all kind of come from money or have some money. They're not going to understand that if it's a mainly black community, and we could say this for any community that is lesser on the income scale, and I'm not saying black as a whole, I'm just saying if that community is Mexican and less on the income scale, white, there's going to be more people living in homes. I've seen it with white, Mexican, any group. I've seen a lot of people living in homes. Like my stepfather, when he was growing up for a while, he had to live in a home with 30 other Polish people that were his cousins, and just like at his aunt's house, and like that they had a lot of family, and they had a lot of cousins that lived there. So like obviously like that's crazy, but and like it's not like that anymore for a lot of people. But our representatives have to know who they're passing these zoning ordinances for. Another good example would be like, let's say here in Girard, right? It's very hard, and I get it, snowing, or if you want to clean streets, you want people not on the streets. It's very hard to clean a whole street without cars on it. problem in Girard is, and I bet some areas of Warren have this problem, you have a lot of apartment places. So I live in a fourplex that has, I only have one car, but for basically all the other people that live here, the other three people, they always have two cars around. So you're basically getting 7 cars in one house area. Now, I know zoning. I've done a lot with it. My company actually wrote a lot of zoning laws around here. It's kind of hard to even debate that if it was a convenience store to have 7 spots. Like, you would need a handicap spot at that point, and it's not a convenience store, but it's kind of hard to not have people park on the street, especially when you need some driveways to be access roads and not have people parking there. You can't get to the back. Or I see a lot in apartments or duplexes around Girard. So certain areas, and that's why I kind of like zoning, overlays, zoning districts matter, because then you could have a zoning district for that area and say, okay, it's a little bit different than other areas. But obviously, like we're saying, even after the civil rights, there has been a lot of laws and a lot of times that they've been caught passing a law that even they could say that, there's nothing about, like Tommy said, race in the law, in the ordinance, just because they're not thinking about the ordinance itself. It could be perceived as more racist and attacking one group. And I can go on all day because I think about that. Like the city of Girard, a week ago, and Mayor Zuppo said he was going to do it, and a judge passed it. I don't know if Zuppo asked him to or it came up in a case or anything, but the city of Girard used to have pit bulls banned, and they just lifted that. They said it was actually illegal to have that ban. And I kind of agree with that, especially with certain, it's kind of hard to pick out one dog and not the other. So that's nice. And there's times like that. We could debate, if there was a specific ban like that in areas of Youngstown, you could 100% say that's racist based on the people that live there and the dogs they have. And same if they did the same zoning law, if it was areas of Youngstown or Struthers of high black or high Mexican, Latino populations, for anything like that. Now we'll go on to a funny news topic. It's kind of playing off the last leak that we had on Signal. But once again, our defense secretary, Pete Hegseth. Did I say it right? Hegseth? Hegseth. Okay, that's a great name. It says Seth in it. Shared detailed information about forthcoming strikes in Yemen on March 15th in a private Signal group chat that included his wife, brother, and personal lawyer. The chat also included the now leaker. The chat was created by Hegseth, and those people were added on purpose. Initially, the chat was for more routine information, but it shifted to classified info. The chat included classified information, including flight schedules. Hegseth was warned not to share classified info on Signal, but did it anyway. And the flight schedules, that's actually what he leaked the first time on the first attack, when me and Tommy were talking about the leaving. And people talk about war plans, that is war plans. If we were attacking bin Laden and we said, hey, the stealth Blackhawks are leaving at 800, that's scary. You don't want the Taliban learning about that. So that's why you do this. And what me and Tommy talked about before, even though it's set encryptedly, it doesn't mean that the phone's encrypted or that it could be intercepted as well and decrypted. We have AI, we have supercomputers now. They were able to create, with just using copper and metal, the first computer, Alan Turing, to finish the Enigma in World War II from the Germans' encryption system. Computers are way smarter than that. So obviously, Signal, it's good, and but it all depends, I bet the KGB could hack Signal if they wanted to, and other certain groups with a lot of money and high tech, China could hack Signal if they wanted to, or hack the phones and then know what they're talking about. Because I have a Signal, it doesn't ask you a password to sign in. So if you hack someone's phone, and think about it, because how now you have that phone recording, it's kind of like that. They basically have control of your phone, kind of like a screen capture. If you work in any type of Teams environment and you had to have the IT remote in, they could remote in on your phone, click Signal, click what chats they want to, and just literally instantly download it. All the text, all the raw files, all the data, and now they have that. So we do have to be smart about this kind of stuff. Like we kind of talked about before, they gave Hillary a lot of crap for her emails. Trump's first administration, he had issues with this as well, and they pushed it under the rug. But obviously, we kind of knew at the time that Hillary's emails was mostly sexism. I'll call it out as it is. Call a spade for that one, especially if they're not going to have a strong backbone about security in the future. What's your takes on this, Tommy?
Well, you know, you pretty much hit a lot of the main points. I like Signal. I think Signal's, definitely, more secure than, SMS texting or iMessage, etc. But should you be sharing the nuclear codes on Signal? Should you be sharing the flight paths of a forthcoming attack on a group in Yemen, and thus, putting the lives of our soldiers in risk? No. Like you previously said, nothing I think is truly unhackable. But probably the biggest concern with Signal is, like you touched on earlier, is, it doesn't require a password to sign in. What if you just lose your phone? What if you leave your phone at the Starbucks? What if you leave it at a bus station? And then someone just picks it up. God forbid a foreign adversary, an agent of a foreign adversary picks it up, and then the first thing they're probably going to do is open Signal and see, there's this information that is highly classified. So I think just overall, it's just, it's included in the funny section just because it's so stupid that it strikes as funny, but it is, of course, a very serious issue.
But it is funny.
I just think it's insane.
What I think is interesting, people that deal with high money, brokers, anytime that deal with high money, you can get a little fob from whatever bank, Wells Fargo, they'll send it to you. If you deal with high money, it has a code, kind of like a one-time authentication, but it changes every day. I bet, like, any type of, like, you know what I mean? Like, our military encryption networks are probably better than Signal. They probably have one-time they might have one-time codes per sign-in, and it switches. And they probably have their own things, their own steps that are better to get. It's 100%, I bet, harder to hack for U.S. government security system than Signal, but we kind of have to think about that. And if I'm not wrong, Hegseth was a Fox News anchor. Did he have a military background before?
He was in the service. He was in the service. He's an alcoholic, by the way. Just putting that out there. He likes to drink. He likes to drink a lot.
So did Grant, but that was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago. So he likes to drink. He was a Fox News contributor. He was in the military.
Like, I wonder if he was in intelligence, because how do you be this bad and be in the military? Like, when you get that top secret secure clearance, like we talked about, I heard a lot. Like, you learn a lot about not messing that up. I don't know.
Well, and they told him the day before, don't do this, and to sort of talk about, like, I do know a little bit about, like, security measures just by, like, reading about this and reading about the previous news story with that Atlantic report. Like they have something called a SCIF, which is basically just like a box in a room that's made of, like, special, like, materials that people can't listen into this box. They can't, like, send in, like, listening devices, and it's connected to sort of phones that are connected to, like, the United States like cybersecurity apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of infrastructure that is normally used for discussing this type of information, not just like an app on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
And for Pete Hegseth to do this when he was told not to, and by the way, he was telling people this stuff who had no business even knowing it, like his wife, his brother, personal lawyer. What do they have to do with the forthcoming strike in Yemen?
Yeah.
So it's just incredibly careless. It breaks all procedures.
Also,
and
I
he
wonder,
was told not to do it, and he did it anyway.
I wonder how Signal works, if it's just encrypted on the surface web, because like Tommy's talking about, if you know stuff about the internet, the U.S. government actually created the dark web to transfer information. Somehow China still got all of that, like stole a lot of our information, like the F-35s that we transferred through the dark web, stuff like that. But I don't know if Signal is just encrypted on the surface web, or if it's encrypted and, like, that's the whole reason or if it's, like, just through the dark web how they send it. But that'll be interesting as well to see like how it's actually sent through the internet. There's like three
Yeah.
main levels of the internet and how it runs. Each level is darker, like harder to encrypt, harder to find sources from. But like
And you
I
know,
don't think an app on your phone like could have Tor on it and just instantly get into the dark web for you. Or maybe it can. I don't know.
and this is listed on our docket here as, as under the funny news section. But it would not have been funny. Like we're talking about it right now under this section because it's just the incompetence is breathtaking.
Hmm.
But it absolutely would not be funny. If one of our airmen or women, was struck by a Houthi missile over Yemen, and died because or became captured because this signal chat was somehow compromised. Of course that's a hypothetical, but it shows just, how something like this, like such a brazen security breach by the Trump administration, by Pete Hegseth, who may or may not have been drunk texting, could really have serious real world consequences for our men and women in uniform.
And like it's interesting because I know a lot of people on the right that love war movies. They loved 13 Hours, the Chris Kyle movie. 13 Hours sat out Hillary in security talking about that. But a good movie and a good footage to actually watch raw is for Black Hawk Down video. Like watching that movie, if you back in the day you were able to watch it online pretty easily. I don't know how it is now, but actually watching that raw video, you got to understand that like yes, like we talked about before, I don't like being imperialistic, but if we're going to be imperialistic in other countries, like let's try to like keep our men as safe as possible. That's kind of why I do like drones instead of certain planes and piloted airplanes and stuff like that for war. But we do kind of have to remember our past and that like if we mess with security, it could be easy for that event to happen again. And that was just a one-off event that actually had nothing to do with security, but it could definitely happen now if they find out this stuff. So it's definitely very important to keep on it. Our next topic, which will be a local news topic one, would be how Trumbull County, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
Approved of a tax abatement for the Kimberly-Clark Paper Company. Kimberly-Clark, a large paper company, purchased the former RG Steel Complex in Warren and Howland Township. And I was told that Warren, Howland, and Champion all agreed for a tax abatement for it.
Not Champion, just
Just
Warren
Warren
and
and
Howland
Howland?
Township.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's not. I think like 75% of the property is in Howland Township, and the extra 25% is in Warren.
Okay.
So they both voted for the tax abatement. But continue.
Are you good? It's a 10-year, 60% tax abatement for the proposed company. Kind of on track in what I've seen with Lordstown before. I remember the state of Ohio had like a 10-year tax abatement with GM for Lordstown, and they tried suing GM because when they left Lordstown, they were still inside that 10-year. So that's nice. So it does kind of lock them into the area for 10 years. The up to $875 million project includes a 1.15 What? Oh, it's just I see on here. Let me look at what you put on here. Oh yeah, no, that's for grants. I was talking about the square footage, but I could talk about that. Yeah. So it's an $875 million project. It's supported by $17 million in grants. Warren and Howland Township already approved the tax abatement last week for Trumbull County commissioners. And I'm bad with some words. Unanimously approved a 10-year, 60% tax abatement. The project still has to be approved by Kimberly-Clark's board, which could take months. The project is expected to create 1,500 jobs. The job site itself would be a 1,157,261 square foot facility that will house a warehouse and office space for manufacturing various consumer hygiene products. One thing I was interesting is I hope this lowers TP and bounty prices around here. Paper towels and toilet paper prices, but we'll see. Commission President Rick Hernandez said he's very confident that this will come to fruition, especially for tax abatement. I hope it will as well. What will happen around that facility is other companies, boxing companies, cardboard companies, distribution companies. It all depends. I've seen in a lot of areas, it's nice to get these jobs. It doesn't really always mean that we're going to get 10 other factories built around it, but we definitely might get some. And we already are getting some factories built around here, and we're pretty good on distributing in this area, just from like us being so popular in the 50s, distributing steel to Pittsburgh and Cleveland. But for jobs would be great. That's a huge facility. That's kind of comparable to an Amazon site and an Amazon fulfillment site. So those are the sites that have for trucks that actually bring in the goods. They put them all into little boxes, the little areas. Amazon kind of like organizes all of the products before they give them to you, and then that's kind of how the robotics and robotic systems, conveyor systems, will send out all the goods to one person. They put them in a box, send them out to the truck. Because I worked on some sites like that, like FedEx sites. A big FedEx facility will be 1 million. A 1 million square foot facility is pretty big. I guess it's almost a $1 billion project.
I think this is a positive news story. The project is expected to create about 500 jobs. I'm glad to see that there is this sort of major company that's sort of coming in here. I have a lot of mixed feelings on tax abatements. Generally I think corporations need to pay their fair share of taxes. But I'll just be honest. I don't think I know enough about this issue to really take a firm position on is the tax abatement necessary or not. But the end result being these 500 jobs that are coming in, it's overwhelmingly positive. I'm hopeful that maybe other jobs around there will pop up as well. It's going to be good for the county and for Warren Township and Howland Township. They're still going to be getting some tax money. The tax abatement's only for 10 years. So I could definitely see how a lot of good can come out of this, and I think it's good for the area.
Yeah, and 60%, and like kind of what we know of capitalism, for workers pay taxes too as well, so that's good. For one thing, I will say to be worried about, and this is public information, I'm not getting in trouble for this. We've seen in the past, in Lordstown too, all I'm going to say about that even after giving grants, 17 million in grants, this job has 60% tax abatement. Sometimes the county or whoever is for local municipality still has to do infrastructure improvement projects around that site for the site to be built. So why I said Lordstown is the village of Lordstown had to pay a lot of money to get the water main bigger to the Lordstown battery plant. That was something that Lordstown, Altium Cells, if I'm not mistaken, you could always look this up, said we will not pay for. Since they kind of already had this village and area by the chokehold that, hey, we're building this big factory, you guys are going to pay. And it may have been $3 million, and that's the top of my head. It probably wasn't even that much. It may have been more because I know we had to put in some water towers. All I'm going to say about that. But so we do have to realize too, as commissioners, as local city councilmen, what needs to be done to that to be built. They will not always pay for that. They will try their best to make the city or, like I'm saying, village, local, county pay for that. It's not the biggest deal if we're getting good money, but like that 17 million grants might have to be 20 million if they have to get OPWC funding or any other type of funding to help out with that. If the local municipalities cannot pay for it, which I don't really find fair. I agree with Tommy. These corporations should be able to pay their fair share. Like we were talking about before with tariffs, I do agree with tariffs in like certain minor areas because like a lot of these big corporations would make more money going out of America. We need to find ways, and it's more than just tariffs, to want them to come back, and even then, like want them to come back and help out the communities. If they're gonna run the community dry or the local area dry of money and tax revenue, even though they're generating tax revenue, it won't be the best overall. But getting 40% tax is nice, so we should be good on that.
Sort of just some points to kind of wrap this up. Obviously people are skeptical. Like before the lithium plant, Altium plant in Lordstown, there was Lordstown Motors, which didn't work out. By Columbus, there was supposed to be that Intel plant, which is still not in, and it's being delayed. Its future is sort of up in the air. So there's a lot of skepticism, about these sorts of projects here in the state of Ohio, and rightfully so. And I just hope that this one takes place, and it proves to be an overall positive thing.
And if I'm not mistaken, that Intel Silicon Columbus plant, that was majorly funded by the CHIP Act.
Correct. Yeah.
So like
And the
that's
state
why
government.
funding matters a lot too, because people need to realize a lot of these companies, they won't make more money unless you give them a lot of grants and a lot of tax amendments or write-offs for a certain amount of time to make them want to come back.
And then the other thing I just wanted to kind of point out with this is the incompetence of our state senator, Sandra O'Brien, who is just all around an awful human being. She said that she didn't even know about this. Like, Jesus Christ, you represent the 32nd district at the state senate. How do you not know about this, Senator O'Brien? Come on, give me a break.
I mean, what are you
Give me a
doing? You're
break.
supposed to be talking with them, helping them out, trying to understand what would make them want to come here.
Yeah, I mean, Sandra O'Brien, though, she's just too busy, thinking up ways to destroy public education in this state. Truly, truly bad person. But just the fact that she didn't know about this, really just shows her competence.
Wow. Yeah. Especially for how much I help her constituents. So. Good input there, Tommy. Thank you. Our next topic is a second local news topic, which Tommy will be covering, which is about groups starting collecting signatures to repeal Senate Bill 1, the Higher Ed Destruction Act.
Yes. So, since we started doing this show, we pretty much talked about SB1, the Higher Education Destruction Act. It's the bill that, once again, limits unions on college campuses, prevents professors from taking a stance on quote unquote controversial issues like climate change, bans DEI, mandates professors publish their syllabus online for sort of a draconian enforcement mechanism. That was signed into law, as we talked about previously. It's a bad law. There was crazy amounts of protests against it, etc. Of course, these people don't care what the people think, so it became law. So, a group of YSU faculty is collecting signatures to repeal SB1 through a referendum. So they must collect an initial 1,000 signatures, and then they can start collecting the 248,092 signatures to get it on the ballot, and they have to do that by the end of June. So this is just sort of a small update to this. Senator Jerry Sinro, who championed the bill, kind of rudely and just sort of passive aggressively say that students they're only against this bill because they're receiving extra credit for protesting and being against the bill and signing this petition. So that's what he said about this. He says, "Oh, these college kids, they don't know what they want. They're just doing this for extra credit. They're just protesting for extra credit. They're just protesting for they're receiving extra credit for signing the petition, for protesting, etc." So, he seems to be sort of just like a very passive aggressive bad person.
Yeah, I wonder what classes he went to where you get extra credit to protest, because
I don't know.
I never had those classes.
No, I didn't either. It's just absolutely crazy. But overall, this is a hard thing to do. Getting a referendum on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
I was involved in several of them in the past. It's very, very, very difficult. You have to do a lot of work. It requires organizing throughout the whole state. You have to do it in so many counties, and it's grueling work. And that's just to get it on the ballot. Then you got to run an actual campaign on telling people to vote to repeal SB1. So
mm-hmm.
I think this is fantastic. I hope they're successful in this effort. And I commend these YSU faculty who are doing this, because it is very, very, very difficult. It takes a lot of money to do this. Lots and lots and lots of money to do this. But I hope they're successful. SB1 is a terrible, terrible, terrible piece of legislation that hurts Ohio students and faculty.
And what sucks is you see a lot of people talking about it that, I'm just being honest, like, before they didn't care about education. There were people that were openly honest about not caring about education in high school. And people have different paths through life. You can care about educating yourself in different ways through wisdom and intelligence after high school, but it shows if you didn't take it seriously back then, how you take it seriously now. Or just like even your starting points of that education and removing ignorance from your life. So like it's kind of like that control thing we talk about sometimes, that people want to take control of things that they don't have control over, that they don't understand. Like, we should allow people, kind of like with the schools, and allowing psychologists to be the counselors, the best people to have the best solutions. You know what I mean? The State House of Ohio isn't an education council that decides all of education for all of
Yeah.
Ohio. But that's what they're seeing themselves as right now.
Yeah. They're just trying to push through more authoritarian measures that, limit free speech, academic freedom, labor rights, etc. And, I guess they're doing it to, further their cause in the so-called culture war. Like, I don't really understand, why they're doing this, other than, they want people not to learn things. Like that very well may be it. Is they don't want people to learn things because they want them to be obedient, good little citizens. If
And
they, if the
I've
professor
had
is,
talks with people on the right who have issue with college. The issues they have with college are not realistic issues. It's an issue.
yeah,
It's an issue that I was taking a sociology class and we were supposed to write on women, and I wrote an extremist sexist paper on it, and my professor got mad at me. You know what I mean? Or I was supposed to write a paper, and a lot of it's ego, that I always think I'm right
yeah,
and the professor's not right. And like, I'm not gonna lie, if you're going for business, I get it. But like, certain fields, you learn that you're not always right. If an engineer always thought that he was right, we would have a lot of shit failing, just all around the world. Like, you have to
so
understand that, like, people are better at certain things and you're not always right, and people kind of have issues with that. And I don't know if that's like a mental issue, and
yeah.
then kind of like make that their whole issue with education.
I had this when you were talking about the person, that wrote an extremely sexist paper and got a bad grade. I had this sad horn queued up, but you kept talking, so I'm just gonna no sound effect. But you know, if professors are allowed to teach the fact, and it is a fact, that climate change is real and it's caused by humans, they're not allowed to teach that. You know, people are not going to know about it. They're not going to be upset about it, and that's going to make it a hell of a lot easier for big business to ruin the whole world for us, so they can increase shareholder value.
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
might be that simple. That's probably what it is. That's probably what it is. A lot of these sort of culture war issues, like DEI, banning teaching about climate change, all of that is terrible. All of that is terrible. I 100% am against all of those measures. I'm pro DEI, pro learning about climate change. But I always suspect that the reason why the right is doing this is so that when everyone's doing this, when everyone's freaking out about this, they're running in the back door, they're taking everyone's money, and they're leaving, and they're gonna, cut taxes for the rich, and it's just ridiculous, and it has to stop. People need to be able to learn that climate change is real, need to be able to do it in a diverse environment. And by the way, yes, the rich should pay their fair share of taxes. Okay, stop running in that back door, looting the treasury. Don't do that. Um,
And what I find
but I
interesting,
suspect that
you can finish off real quick. Sorry.
but I suspect though that in the state of Ohio, where the state government does not give a shit. They do not care what people think about them. They do not care at all. They laugh. They laugh when there's 1,000 students protesting against SB1. They laugh. They light up a cigar and they go in to vote how they want, to make themselves wealthier at the expense of the rest of us. So
Yep.
those people aren't going to change unless they're voted out.
Agreed and changed. And their positions themselves. I agree. And it's interesting too, because I see it a lot in people that don't go to college or haven't been to college recently, and then college back in the day kind of was the same way. I see it a lot in classes that aren't their main field. So if they're a nurse and they're taking a sociology class, you know what I mean, they have issues because they're not used to how just normal classes are that aren't nursing classes. When I was in engineering, I think I only had to take like 5 or 6 classes that weren't engineering classes. One of them I took for like a social credit was women's studies. And it's interesting because I went in that class like very excited to learn about like how that environment is. And you even learn like going into that class, our teacher was like, "There's never a wrong answer." Even though we had 3 men in that class, he always said like, "Whatever you guys thought, you could always say. Don't be afraid to give your opinion." Well, people on the right think it's not like that. And like, yeah, if I'm in a women's studies class and I think all women should be treated like the 1950s, yeah, there's going to be an eruption. But if I was in an engineering class and I said, hey, why don't we do 1950s math or using 1950s specs, I'm also going to get yelled at. So like there's modernization in life, and that also happens with stuff we talk about a lot, which is sexism and racism. But you learn about that like in class. That's why like DEI is important, and having a high emotional intelligence is important. Because like if you say extremes, you are gonna get targeted for that. But it's also like a way of education. Because like if I were to say that in my women's studies class, it's not like they're gonna fight me and lock me up against a wall. They're gonna attack me with like Fadzik logic and all this stuff that I learned throughout women's studies of like how there actually was like a lot of sexism for women back in the day. How there was a lot of domestic abuse, a lot of suicides in women that was not talked about because of a sexism for men and how men controlled everything back then. So that's a little tangent, but kind of like I always feel like it's interesting with like how people feel about education on the right, and that it's a good learning experience. You know what I mean? Like you don't go into a women's studies class not expecting to learn about women, not expecting to learn about what they had to fight for the freedoms that they have now. Um, I always find it interesting, the quote of that freedom will never be like freely given by the oppressor. It has to be gained through violence by the oppressed. Women as a whole, domestic violence was not illegal until nurses rose up in the 1950s and made it illegal because women were nurses moreover, or nurses were more women as a whole back then, and they were the front lines of seeing abused women and seeing women lie for their husbands, and they got tired of it. We learn about that a lot through history. Same with the ADA. If you look about a lot of these photos, a lot of the protests that happen, that's something I always find interesting too. Our next topic, and it kind of goes into that, we could slide right in, is the anti-Trump protests. Some people would say, what do protests do? Protests help us get us out of Vietnam. Protests has helped us pass the Civil Rights Act to get women to vote, to get a lot of freedoms in this country. The ADA in the 90s, there's photos of people in wheelchairs sitting at Capitol Hill protesting the ADA passage. And even after the ADA being passed, it still took another 10, 15 years for the ACA and for them to actually get help by the government to get affordable health care for their disabilities. But our next topic is about the anti-Trump protests rally that happened in Youngstown, New York, Washington, all throughout the country. It was on April 19th. Me and Tommy will be going over that. I'll let Tommy finish the rest for this topic, and I'll give my opinion after.
Yeah, so on April 19th, that was Saturday. That was the day of the start of the Revolutionary War, which I thought was interesting, and that kind of sort of made a lot of sense to me, because I was wondering when I was going to these protests, like, why are they branded this way? But it was during the Revolutionary War. So people took to the streets to protest Trump. Protests took place around the country in both populous and rural areas, from New York to Washington, D.C., to smaller cities around the nation. Notably, a protest took place at Lexington and Concord, a place where the Revolutionary War started. Organizers say they oppose what they call Trump's civil rights violations and constitutional violations, including efforts to deport scores of immigrants and scale back the federal government by firing thousands of government workers and effectively shuttering entire agencies. Other events were branded as No Kings, again referring to the start of the Revolutionary War. So it seems like there's going to be sort of like national protests happening in this country about every 2 weeks, which I think is fantastic. We, as citizens of the United States, we have, an obligation, I believe, to stand up for not only our rights, but importantly, also the rights of others. Okay? So we need to make sure that we do not sort of backslide into some sort of authoritarian style system. And I was just glad to see that these protests are continuing. Okay. and that they seem to be attracting a good amount of people. Mm-hmm. I was there personally, the one in Youngstown and Warren. They were both good events. The Youngstown one was in particular was very, very good. They had a bunch of good speakers who shared their perspectives about the fear they feel being black and brown in the United States of America, with ICE just running around just arbitrarily detaining people and shipping them off to foreign countries. Hearing them talk about that was just truly, truly heart-wrenching.
And it's interesting, yeah, like people don't really realize people on the right, sometimes people on the left. Like patriotism also means like understanding our history and what we fought for. And it's interesting seeing the amount of authoritarianism that is happening. Like we talk
Yeah.
about, if you know good German history about how the Nazis took power, they attacked education. You know what I mean? And I'm not calling Trump or anyone Nazis, but I'm saying like that's why we know our history, because to take absolute power, you have to attack certain pillars of democracy. And like we and Tommy talk about, not listening to the courts is one of those pillars of democracy.
Exactly. And it's just so, these are very, very dark times, but it does give me hope to see that there were so many people out there in the streets peacefully, asserting their right under the First Amendment of the Constitution to peacefully assemble.
And like
And to do
Tommy
that,
thought about like you were saying about like what's your duty, or like what I kind of I kind of feel like even as Americans, but as like Americans that like came, most of us came from immigration. It's kind of our duty to be fair to other people. So like we can't have a mentality that like my family's here now, screw everyone else. We have the
Yeah.
a mentality that like we give those people the same opportunities our family had back in the day, as well.
You shouldn't be protesting just because something affects you. You should be also protesting because something affects someone else who is also your fellow citizen or your fellow human being who deserves to have the dignity and respect of that's provided to them under natural rights, the law, the United States Constitution, etc. I think that's one of the core pillars of protesting is, hey, this is not just about me. This is about our society. This is about our social contract. And these attempts to erode that and erode us into an authoritarian society is just simply unacceptable. And even if it doesn't affect you yet, you need to be out there in the streets demanding it stop, because I can guarantee you it's affecting your neighbors, it's affecting your friends, and it just needs to stop. And good on these people that are doing it. Again, I was so happy to see these people out there, and I like to see they were all sort of protesting the Trump administration, of course, but they were all out there for different reasons. One person was out there about due process. The lack of due process is bad. Another person was out there protesting, cuts to Social Security. Another one out there was out there protesting cuts to Medicaid. And this collective power that we all hold, just as not as politicians, not as someone who holds a JD, but just simply as citizens and people. It cannot be overstated that we as people have to hold our governments accountable, have to hold the government accountable in a peaceful way.
Agreed. And like kind of like we talked about before with history, if you know about how the Nazis, you can go to museums and see people talking about I didn't care and sort of taking my people away. This is something I've experienced firsthand in protesting, where back when Trump first got elected in 2016, and they were trying to get rid of the ACA, I protested against that. And ending up being in 2020, I had a stomach disease called C. diff colitis. Well, my father had Anthem insurance. My mom had CareSource insurance. CareSource is for state Ohio Medicare, Medicaid, and funded insurance. When I got C. diff, it's something that doesn't kill you, but it can over time. Especially like I basically had it for a year or 2 years. You get rid of it through antibiotics. My dad's business owner, because he owned a business, Blue Anthem did not cover medicine, but CareSource did. And this was without paying. It would have been like $2,000 without insurance. I had to take it 3 times. Each time, Anthem denied it and CareSource approved it. So even protesting back then, I wasn't realizing that like that one day could have saved my life and could have saved me from a lot more weight loss and a lot more pain. I lost 120 pounds because of having C. diff in a year. So very unhealthy type of weight losses, and you're not getting the right type of nutrients. That could happen with anyone. It could happen with you thinking you're never going to become disabled and need Medicare and Medicaid, or you thinking that, it could never be you that doesn't get due process. But that's how we have to think, that if people around our country are getting due process. That's what I was talking about before, too, about our history. Like, we fought fascism throughout years, and we were never going to allow these people to get taken away without due process. If we had these young men from World War II and could teleport them, or like from 1950 to now, and say like this is the America now, they would go crazy because they defended against that. They fought against that. They have PTSD because they fought against that. Lost some of their best friends and brothers for that. We have to understand that. Like, stay true to our roots. That like we are even though we have done messed up things in the past in other countries, even here, like we should stay true to like the integrity that America holds. That like, everyone has the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Everyone has the right to due process. Everything that our Bill of Rights and Constitution state for us.
And the the rights enshrined in the United States Constitution, the principles described in the Declaration of Independence, we, as a nation, we never truly lived up to them. If it's the genocide against Native Americans, discrimination against German speakers in the First World War, Japanese internment in the Second World War, Jim Crow, and of course slavery. We'd never fully lived up to these principles that are prescribed in our founding documents. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. We need to be a country that provides due process to people, that recognizes human rights, that welcomes immigrants with open arms who are fleeing gang violence in El Salvador. These are things we need to do. I do not claim for a moment that we have ever fully lived up to these principles, but that does not mean that the principles themselves are worth throwing away.
Agreed. Especially when things haven't been amended to say every man and woman have these rights, and like the Equal Rights Amendment stuff hasn't been specifically modified. The laws definitely have changed, but we definitely need to keep staying true to our word and everything we stay to. And if something I was going to say too, it's interesting. If you ever watch Captain America, I know you haven't. Good movie though. The second one's Winter Soldier, where he fights with Bucky, the Winter Soldier, his best friend. But the premise of the movie is that S.H.I.E.L.D., who's supposed to be the good secret side of the U.S. government that has superheroes and crap, they were basically, it was a coup from Hydra from the start. Hydra's the secret Nazi division. But even when Captain America sees that in the second movie, it's not like he says, okay, I'm just going to follow S.H.I.E.L.D.'s orders because they are my bosses. He does what's right. If that's kind of why we do hope anyone who took the duty of a constitution, military, police, whatever, understands those duties. That even if you get taken an order that's not constitutional, not lawful, you have the right to deny that. That's about it for me on this topic.
No, that's all I have to say. Just again, thank you for all the people that came out. You're truly great Americans. There's this famous quote. It's called, it says, "Dissent is the highest form of patriotism." And that's a quote that I hold dearly. And it's something that is always in the back of my mind. That sometimes the right thing to do, sometimes the patriotic thing to do, is to say, hey, this is not right. We need to be protecting the rights of others. So thank you. That's all I have to say on this.
Yep. And that's our last topic. I hope everyone has a great night. A little bit longer today, but we like that. Weather's getting a little bit colder. Hope everyone has a great start to your week, and you guys have a great night, Northeast Ohio, or anyone watching on the internet.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.